Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. I hope you'll be as inspired as I have been and work with us to put batteries at the centre of smart local energy systems and community energy future viability. Just a note that we'll be recording this event and it will be shared afterwards on our YouTube channel and website, and we'll send the slides and the links and the recording afterwards to you all to distribute far and wide. Please put any questions you have through the event in the Q&A function, not the chat, and we'll address them in the Q&A at the end. And if not, it'll become the core of our frequently asked questions. I'm Duncan Law, Head of Policy and Advocacy at Community Energy England, and I'll be hosting today, but mainly we'll be hearing from colleagues from Energise Sussex Coast, Energy4All and Envol Energy, who are new members and key delivery partners for community batteries. This webinar is part of the Energy Learning Network, or ELN, which is a UK-wide initiative that supports community energy projects, helping organisations launch and grow schemes that decarbonise the grid and deliver local benefits. The ELN offers free insights, resources and connections for both established groups and those new to community energy, alongside mentoring and peer learning opportunities. And the ELN is a collaboration between CEE, Ashton, Centre for Sustainable Energy, Community Energy Scotland, Community Energy Wales, and Northern Ireland's Action Renewables. And you can read more about it on our website. And Faith Terry Doyle from CEE is in the meeting if you want to message her direct. So before we get into the power of batteries, I want to say that I think well-managed batteries have the potential to be a key underpinning for community energy to grow and provide stable and profitable income and real benefit to local projects and customers, and a central element in smart local energy systems, which community energy has got a real competitive advantage in delivering. We've set up a dedicated page on the CEE website, which we will update as things progress. Link should be in the chat soon. And I want to urge you all to respond to the government's call for evidence on assessing the case for community batteries, or at least contribute to Community Energy England's response. And the deadline is 11:45 p.m. next Thursday, the 30th of July. So you've got a bit more than a week. We say there's a good case, but your vision and experience particularly is what will convince the government that community batteries are really worth backing. The consultation is, the call for evidence is very targeted at those with or actively planning batteries. But even if you're right at the beginning of your journey towards incorporating batteries, there are still questions you can answer and show your enthusiasm for community batteries. Community Energy England has produced a shared document with questions. This is a shared draft response with questions color-coded to help you know which ones to answer. Green for anyone can answer, amber for if you have or are planning batteries, and red if you actually have a community battery. If you do have a community battery, it's really important that you input your numbers and your perspective. There are some 30 community battery projects that we know about, but we need a really strong showing and a good sample for the department to work with. You're welcome to echo our response in yours, but please do not cut and paste. It devalues both ours and yours. And you can even say that you've seen the CE response, which is still evolving, and you endorse it. I'll come back to the call for evidence at the end. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Yang and Zach and Richard to inspire us all.
Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll go first. My name is Yang. I'm one of the founders of Envol Energy, and we've been working quite closely with Zach and Richard on a number of active battery projects and upcoming sort of potential future battery projects. So hopefully we'll give you today have a chance to talk through what we've learned, talk through some of our ideas, and just get your feedback and try and get this topic more attention. So let me move forward. In terms of the agenda, so we'll start off with a bit of a discussion around what the role of batteries actually is on the grid, just a bit of an overview. A little bit around what we actually mean by a community battery, because I think there's a lot of potential different definitions around that. We'll talk a little bit about what Envol Energy in particular is doing, and then we'll move on to looking through the different community battery operating models, the different financial models that we've been evaluating, and Zach will help to support some of those discussion points as well. And then finally, a case study led by Richard from Energise Sussex Coast, looking at a fairly sizable deployment that is currently being built up. And we'll finish up with the Q&A, as Duncan has said. So yeah, bit of a high-level overview. Batteries on the electricity grid. I think everyone here probably understand that batteries are a crucial part of achieving a net zero grid by storing up renewable power. Oh, sorry, is there an echo? Can people hear me okay? Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
I'll carry
it's
on.
fine.
I think everyone understands that batteries are a key part of achieving that net zero grid by storing up the renewable energy that we're able to generate and actually allowing it to be consumed at the times that people want to consume it. And helped by the cost of batteries decreasing over the past 5 years, there's been growing amount of battery deployment on our grid, but mostly focused on either big grid scale systems where you're dealing with central transmission grid connections, big sites storing up a large amount of power, or more often in domestic settings as well, where people are deploying their own batteries alongside their own rooftop solar. More recently, cabinet-sized battery systems have actually become increasingly relevant and affordable. And it's these sizes of systems that we think are particularly relevant to community energy. And just that little diagram shows a bit of sense of scale there. That's the kind of size that we're talking about, just over a meter or so in footprint area and about a couple of meters high and weighing somewhere in the region of 2 to 2.5 tons as a system. These are sort of all-in-one systems that actually have become quite cost effective and more interestingly are easier to connect to the grid than the big grid scale systems, but also able to store more power and have a bit more impact than a domestic system, and also able to access a wider range of financial models. So that's what we're focusing on today. In terms of that other question, what is a community battery? I think we think a community battery is any battery system that's owned and operated for the benefit of the local community. We are aware that other models have existed, and I'm sure some people here have looked at community ownership of domestic batteries. We're not going to focus on that today. They're sort of an interesting area, but we've not focused too much on researching that here. We're talking predominantly about these kinds of systems ranging from 100 kilowatt hours, so a small cabinet, up to sort of 5 or 6 cabinets that can total up to in the megawatt hour range. Batteries are also a rapidly evolving area. I think we want to say that we certainly don't have all the answers. We're not trying to say that everything we're looking at here is 100% right and the best way of doing things. We're here to encourage groups to engage, to explore how batteries can work for them. And as Duncan said earlier, to encourage everyone to participate in that DESNZ call for evidence, particularly because the definitions of community batteries that they have in there, I think, are quite narrow. And it would be interesting to get people to contribute their thinking into that. Firstly, let me talk a little bit about what Envol Energy is doing and what they're all about. So I think the thing that is a key differentiator around batteries compared to solar is that they are fundamentally more complex to manage, and the deployment of batteries is more complex to get right. And our aim is to try and use our expertise as a business in AI and optimization to help community energy groups from adopting and benefiting from these kinds of community batteries. In terms of how we do that, so we've been engaging with groups on identifying sites, scoping them, modeling the finances around it, and supporting around sort of project management, deployment side of things as well. At its core, it's our experience in managing smart battery systems and the AI optimized trading that we do. So this is to maximize the revenue that these systems can make across a number of different revenue models. And then finally, we've been working actually quite closely with the distribution networks. On the one hand, working with them to try and understand the innovation potential around these community assets, because there are new revenue streams that can be created where we're able to support the very local areas of the grid, but actually also importantly to help the DNOs understand the relevance of these kinds of systems and not put up barriers to deployment of these kinds of larger community scale assets. Ooh, ooh. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the operating models for the different community battery concepts that we've looked at. So there's three models that we're focusing on today. First one, I'm going to say, is a standalone community-owned battery. This is something that is in front of the meter, and we'll explain a little bit more about what that means in a second, and sits as its own device. And it's something that is an investable asset that can be deployed. There's an evolution of that where standalone batteries can then engage in power sharing directly within the community. And again, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And then finally, integrating community scale batteries with existing energy sites. So these might be rooftop solar or standalone solar farms, etc. And Zach will be talking a bit more about that. So first of all, a standalone battery. So this is something that's we call front of the meter. This fundamentally just means that it has its own grid connection. It's not tied to or behind any other grid connections. They can be co-located with ground-mounted solar, with rooftop solar, potentially as a way to increase the profitability of that solar, and fundamentally generates revenue by trading on the grid and providing grid services. So you can see there that by gaining access to half-hourly pricing, both on the system price and the day-ahead price, the kind of wholesale energy markets that operate on a half-hourly basis, it's a very good way of just generating revenue on that. There are other revenue sources as well around the distribution network charges, as well as grid flexibility. So it's a quite complex set of different revenue stacks which layer together to provide the overall revenue for this kind of system. Typically, we're looking at around a 5-year payback period on a 15-year battery life. A site saves around 20 tons of CO2 per year. And this is for the size that I've listed there, so 250 kilowatt hours, roughly speaking. And just to say how that number is derived, it's based on essentially mitigating the most heavily polluting unit of electricity that's being generated. So essentially, if you've been able to store up some cleaner power and you're deploying it, it means that a gas turbine is not having to be run, or a gas turbine is being reduced at that moment in time, and that's how you're able to save on CO2 emissions.
Yeah, and I've just realized the screen share's obviously gone a bit weird. I'm just gonna try and sort that out for you. Okay, there you go. Looks better now. Thank you.
Okay, and an interesting evolution of a standalone battery is something that we've been looking at very carefully as well. So when you've got a standalone battery with its own meter, it can also function as a shared community asset. So the idea is that it can work as a shared pool of storage for people in the community. And this is where it's an interesting area to sort of grow. The market for this is still very novel. Obviously, people like Energy4All and People4One initiatives have moved forwards with this. And I think this is an area that has a lot of potential to be relevant to the business models of these kinds of community systems. And the real benefit of that is that it can provide access to batteries for housing stock that may not be otherwise suitable. So with the latest wiring regulations, flats and maisonettes and so on struggle to actually have space to put domestic batteries. So even if the tenants or the owners want to do that, they're somewhat prevented from doing that. So being able to have a shared pool of battery opens up quite an interesting range of possibilities, and in fact gives a better utilization of that battery asset for those people. So yeah, it could potentially be more cost effective to install batteries in this way within communities, and also critically provides benefits of these kinds of batteries and low carbon technologies for some of the most vulnerable energy customers that would benefit from it the most. I will stop here and hand over to Zach, who I think is taking forward with some of the examples that he's looking at.
Thank you. We might come on to your question, Cara, as we go through this. So the first kind of model that we were thinking about is more kind of a solar farm, but there are a few rooftop opportunities for that at the moment. So you've got a very big rooftop and not much consumption on site. And the battery will be doing export arbitrage. So it'll be storing the generation during the day to export in peak times in the evening. So you avoid being on a fixed 6 or 7p PPA, and you avoid the very low rates you get for noon summer generation. And you're exporting it at maybe 20, 25p in the evening when everyone's cooking their dinner. You could do what you like with the on-site usage. That could be powered by the battery, or they could keep their normal import contract. And there is a potential to do grid trading as well, especially in the winter when the solar won't be doing as much work. We could be charging overnight. I've lost control of the slides, Faith.
Let me just figure that out.
Got that. Thank you.
Have you got it back now, Zach?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, cool.
The next model we're thinking about using batteries pretty much the other way around, with sites that have high consumption, but either poor roof solar or just enormous amounts of consumption. Their solar rooftop capacity is just not enough to make a big impact. Is that we then do import arbitrage. So we're buying cheap power to then power the site all day from the low points in the pricing schedule. You could also do grid trading with this kind of model, but actually, because you're sizing the battery to the site's consumption, there's probably not much extra capacity left, and there's not much time that you're not doing your main job. There could be a question on this one: is it community energy if we're just buying power from the grid and then giving it to the site at the right time? But I think each society will make its own decision on that. But if it's community owned, that ticks a box for me, I think. And another concept we came up with is doing behind the battery community sites. And that's where we have a site with relatively low consumption, but a relatively high grid connection. So it might be a village hall that's used twice a week, but still has a 3-phase grid connection. And we could basically take that over for a battery to do grid trading. And then we can supply a small amount of energy to the village hall or scout hut, whatever it is, behind the meter or behind the battery. And we're doing the trading with the grid behind the meter, but in front of the site. You will need asset metering on sites like this because you don't want to be paying the final consumption levies when you're importing the electricity used to export the vast majority of it again. Now, how we're going to do the financial models gets a bit tricky, and I think Giovanni, you've come up with the problem. We don't know what these prices are, the spread on the import price versus sell price, or the generation price versus export price is unknown, so it's very tricky. But the simple thing is that a battery doing export arbitrage will improve the sale price for electricity. And we're already seeing that export PPAs from a solar site are lower than you get for wind or hydro because it is less valuable in the middle of the day. But is that increase going to be big enough to justify the cost of the battery? Import arbitrage, it helps the sites that have very little solar, and you can avoid some very high charges, especially into the capacity market as well. You can avoid those levies. But is the reduction that we can give to the site big enough to give them savings and pay off the capex of the battery as well, and obviously the running costs of the system? Grid trading, it does just come down to the spread between what you're buying the electricity at and what you're selling it at. If prices go up, the spread tends to increase. So your import costs might go up, but your export income is likely to increase further. And flexibility, is it a main business case? It seems a bit like a lottery ticket at the moment. You build a battery, and sometimes you might get paid an awful lot for doing some grid services, but you're not going to be able to build a full business case based on it from what I've seen at the moment. If anyone has a different experience, please do let me know. It'd be really interesting to hear about that. Whenever you're doing a financial model, there's a few risks to consider. And the big ones here are kind of on the startup side, where we're looking at it can be difficult to access that full revenue stack. I think batteries can do an awful lot for the grid and for local areas, but we're just not getting paid for it at the moment. And there's not much chance that's going to improve all the way, but it can get easier over time. Consumption levies being charged on import but not paid on export. So if you are trying to do multiple jobs with a battery, then it can get tricky. So you need that asset metering if you're doing a lot of grid arbitrage on a behind the meter site that's co-located with other consumption. And the long-term certainty income is very poor. So if you're trying to make a share offer to stack up over 15 to 25 years, we have very little certainty of what the income's actually going to be in 15 years' time. There's a lot of dependencies on that. And just mismatches on timing of things. So we have income forecasts that you might be quite happy with for, say, 2 or 3 years. Battery lifespan might be 10 to 15 years, and your PV project might be 25 years on your project, but 40 years of reasonable asset life. So because they don't match up very well, it gets quite tricky how long you're going to model your solar and storage project over when the storage won't last 25 years very well. And then long-term risks, low prices will hurt the battery models. They rely on there being a difference between the import and the export price. And also, if everyone goes into storage or demand-side flexibility, that will cannibalize the revenues. So 2 big ones that are relatively foreseeable, although we don't know how much they will actually happen, is smart controls on EV charging and heat pumps. So if everyone's EVs and heat pumps are soaking up that very cheap power overnight or in a sunny summer's day, then that's going to restrict the spread you get on the arbitrage. And also vehicle-to-grid batteries could be a very big difference. There could be a couple of terawatt hours of storage sitting on people's driveways. If they are encouraged to plug that in and let it work with the grid, that's a huge amount of storage that could solve an awful lot of problems. But it would mean that we were competing with static kind of single-purpose batteries against assets that people have bought anyway. So they don't need very much of a return on that just by plugging it in. But we'll see if people bother. We don't know how big vehicle to grid will actually be. It's a behaviour thing. And that is not my speciality. And now I think we're moving on to Richard.
You're on mute, Richard.
Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Watson, co-founder of Energise Sussex Coast and a director of Energise South Society and the school's Energy Co-op, both of which are members of the Energy4All family. This project didn't actually start with batteries. It started with a simple question, which was how do we turn an entire town into a solar town? So Battle uses around 16.7 gigawatt hours a year of electricity. And we worked out that if we wanted local solar to provide around 25% of that electricity, we need around 4.4 megawatts of solar capacity across the town. Our technical manager, Churchill, built a GIS solar mapping tool. You can see it in the background there, that shows the solar potential of every building in Battle alongside the capacity of all 54 secondary substations and the 3 primary substations. So that gave us our roadmap. So what was the opportunity? Well, something interesting happened. We discovered that the council's housing company had announced or had already started building 200 new homes. And we discovered that 130 would be affordable homes. The homes would have heat pumps. The homes would have EV charging points, but no home would have a single solar panel and no home would have a battery. So we met with them and said that, listen, we're doing this solar town project and we're all going to look a bit silly if the latest housing project in the town has no solar. So why don't you let us try and raise some grant funding and raise some share funding, and we will offer to pay for solar and batteries that will cost you nothing. And happily, they said yes. And that became the Blackfriars project. And surprisingly, to our surprise anyway, we were very lucky to get significant capital funding from the Redress project. So the question, why community batteries? Why didn't we want to put 200 individual batteries on these houses? Well, if you look at the design on the left, it sort of becomes obvious. Modern housing is very, what's the right word? Compact, condensed, close, cluttered. So on maisonettes and flats and terraced houses, with the new regulations about fire and safety, it would be obvious that some households weren't going to get any batteries at all, and others might get rather large batteries. And there wasn't a fair solution, whereas community batteries would solve the problem beautifully. So everybody gets an equal share of the battery output. They're easier to maintain, they earn more income. And because they're connected in front of the meter, they can do much more than simply sell their electricity. They can trade electricity. They can do all the things described above by the others. They can provide flexibility services, support the local network, and it is a very constrained and a very sort of fluctuating voltage network that's always having power outs. And they can generate income for the community. And so working with Envol has really opened our eyes to what's possible. We're hoping that the 5 community batteries, around about 1.4 megawatts, are going to be in operation by the end of this year, installed in autumn and fully operational. So the bigger ambition, what's this doing for us? It's not really about one housing estate. It's about proving a model. We want to show that this can work financially. I mean, obviously, a large chunk of the capital cost is grant funded, but we think it could be self-funding. Maybe 90% self-funding, maybe a bit less, but we're not going to know until we try it. So our ambition is to start with this housing estate and roll it out across Battle, then across Hastings, Bexhill, Rye, Eastbourne, starting with the lowest income neighborhoods. So we're working with Places for People on these 130 affordable homes. And we already have a partnership with Southern Housing, who have another 375 homes in Battle nearby. So this starts to become something very much bigger. The real challenge, though, and this is what I'll end by saying, it's not about raising the money. It's not about installing the batteries. It isn't about developing the technology. For us, it's changing the way people think about energy. So for the last 14 years, we've focused on helping people struggling with fuel poverty and energy inequality. So for example, last year we handled about 9,500 inquiries. We held about 190 community pop-up advice desks. We had one-to-one meetings with over 3,500 households, and we helped them save £840,000 on their energy bills. That's the highest total we've ever achieved. But now we need to ask people to think differently, to think about community ownership, community energy, community sharing, to tell them that the solar panels on your roof won't just belong to you, they'll help power your community. The batteries won't just benefit one household, they'll benefit everyone. The income stays local, the benefits are shared fairly. In many ways, we're simply bringing the 200-year-old cooperative movement into the energy system at a local level. Whether people embrace this immediately or whether it takes time, we're obviously going to find out quite soon. But I think it's every bit as exciting as the technology itself. So I've got some more case study notes, which Community Energy England will send out if they've got your email address. Thank you very much. I think I'm handing back to Duncan.
You are when he unmutes. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you to Yang and Sam and Stephen from Envol Energy and Zach from Energy4All and Richard and Churchill, who is in the background but couldn't attend today, for a very inspiring story and case studies. On to question and answer. We're ahead of our timing, so this is brilliant. We have lots of space for questions. There are a few clarifications. Kate asks, could we have a map to show what we mean by behind the meter and in front of the meter? I think that was at the beginning of the presentation, but if you could just do it again briefly so we're all on the same page, Yang.
Sure. Yeah, sorry if that wasn't clear. So I think the key difference is in front of the meter means it just has its own meter. So it is not attached to any buildings, anything. It has its own dedicated grid connection. And anything that is behind the meter is essentially attached to an existing grid connection of some kind. So whether that's for a community hall or any other sort of building like that. So fundamentally, what it affects is who owns that grid connection in terms of the supplier for the grid connection. And so anything that's behind the meter has to operate in conjunction with whatever energy supply arrangement a particular building might have. And that can create some complications around that. Anything that is dedicated in front of the meter is what we've started out deploying, and that is the most straightforward way to get revenue generation going on these kinds of systems.
Yeah, thank you. And Kate also asks, can we use your presentation at our community event?
So is that a question for us, or I'm
it
sure
is
it's
a question, yes.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, I think yeah, no issue for my for everyone else.
I think maybe the video will be available soon, and I don't know whether it being quite short, the video might be the best way of using it because it comes with its own verbal clarification. And Sandy George asks a question about energy resilience, which is common to lots of community energy projects. Can the Blackfriars development keep the lights on when there's an unexpected outage of power?
It's a good question. So
for about 4 hours, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it should be able to, in theory, do it. It has enough power to do it for quite a long time. The challenge is working that out with the distribution networks. So there isn't anything that prevents the batteries from being able to do this, but the nuance is how do you work with the DNOs to allow that. We are working with the DNOs on a number of innovation conversations, one of which is around islanding. This concept is called islanding, where you're essentially powering up a portion of the grid when the rest of the grid might have lost power. Funnily enough, the main reason they don't like it is operational safety. So they want to know that if they've cut power at a primary substation for a whole town, they don't want random pockets of that grid being live if they are to work on it. So I think the challenge isn't really a technical one there. It's more working with the distribution network to facilitate this kind of thing. So to answer your question, at present, not easily, but it is something that we're talking with the DNOs about.
If we're doing
sorry, Zach, go ahead.
If we're doing a single site, like a village hall, then it should be much simpler to be able to do backup power there. The issue is, say we reserve 50 kilowatt hours to keep the lights on when the power goes out. That's 50 kilowatt hours we can't do any grid trading or other work with. It's basically the unused capacity for 99% of the year, hopefully 100% of the year. Hopefully we don't get to that stage that the power's out for 3 days and everyone has to go to the village hall. But if we want that backup facility, who's paying for it? How are we going to pay for that? Because that's capacity that's not doing other work.
Right. Anonymous, who's very famous, lot of them around. Asks, a company called Amp Clean Power have already signed a deal with my local county council to install small container batteries on parcels of public land, battery box. Might we have missed the boat? How can we compete as communities versus these privately financed companies? There's a question there about, is this something we need to get in early to carve out our share of the market and make early profits on? Or is it actually a risk of going in early?
It's a good question. It's a good question. Yeah. So we are familiar with AMP and the work that they do. So they're slightly larger systems predominantly than I think what the building sized systems we're looking at, but they are relevant in terms of accessing the same core business models. I would say that from a community standpoint, I think it's an opportunity actually to promote community ownership of these kinds of assets, because I think rather than being owned as third party, necessarily sort of privately run systems, community energy is in a unique place to actually translate these benefits into community oriented benefits. And actually just this morning in the GB Energy webinar, which I'm sure a lot of people here would have listened to, they were talking about how a big part of how they want to allocate GB Energy funding is around the social benefit and the community sort of impact on households and low-income households and energy bills and fuel poverty. So I think this is where that narrative can be very powerful in driving that. And just to say on sites as well, I think there isn't a lot of competition necessarily for sites, in the sense that a lot of the battery projects we're looking at are alongside existing community buildings, which are different to this kind of public parcels of public land that you're talking about. But we'd be happy to, I don't know who this is, but we'd be quite happy to have a more detailed conversation around some of this. It is an area that Envol has looked into and understands quite well as a whole. So happy to take that offline if someone wants to pop a message in or send me an email about that.
Brilliant, thanks. I think the parcels of public land is a potential growth area that community energy ought not to ignore. We know that the government is doing a major assessment of vast amounts of publicly owned land to see how they can maximise energy benefit from it. So we should be alive to that, definitely.
Exactly.
Anonymous again, such a genius, asks a key question. How many community batteries are active currently utilising these business models? And I would put in brackets after that, how soon before we will be able to see some figures from community battery projects so that we can begin to pin this down?
So who's best placed to answer that? Zach, maybe you're...
I'll start with what we've got with Energy4All. We have 4 battery sites, none of which are kind of financially working hard enough at the moment. They're all either grant funded or community benefit funded. So they're not ones we could support with a share off at the moment. Working with Richard on the Blackfriars project. I see there is a question about the financial viability. There is a grant fund involved in there, and that helps to de-risk the project. So we're confident we can make it work as it is. And we're hoping that the numbers will work out so we could run kind of similar projects in the future. But that initial grant fund does really help to de-risk it and make us confident enough to raise shares for the remaining costs.
I want to add though as well that battery prices have significantly dropped over the past 12 months or so, sort of compared to 2-3 years ago in particular. So I think the unit profitability of a lot of these systems are a lot more attractive today than they were. But it doesn't change the fact that there is uncertainty on this. And I think we should be able to go back to you guys in 4 months, 6 months time and have some more data around the Blackfriars deployment. I think that will be the first sizable system that is operating, and we can have the numbers from there. Just from Envol's side, we do have, someone's got a question here I see about actual trading numbers. So we do have an operating battery site that we're using as a test and demo site. This is a standalone front of the meter system. And so we do have numbers that we can share around that. We're currently running the month of July as a full test month. And so once that is up, we can actually package that and share some of the data from that, and also showcase how much that battery would have made in a number of different scenarios in different areas of the country. So happy to follow up with Duncan and put that information out somewhere through the CE channels as appropriate.
We will definitely take you off on that. And the community battery working group that we will be setting up, probably meeting initially every couple of months, will be keeping its finger on those pulses and feeding back. So please do sign up to join that. There were some other questions around the financial modelling, which I'd like to stay with for a little bit longer. Particularly around arbitrage. I know you did speak to what Giovanna said earlier. Is there anything more you can say? And are there examples of people doing the arbitrage successfully to pay off the battery in a short amount of time?
I mean, I suppose it possibly links back to my previous answer, really. So we are doing that. We have a site that is operating now has been for the last 5 months. And we should have numbers that we can share to show that. So we are running the arbitrage, and it's across a number of different axes. You've got system price, you've got day ahead price, we've got the DUOS, and as well as potentially accessing the capacity markets and the flexibility markets. So we can share that data. It is in some ways simpler at this size than the big grid scale batteries. The revenue stack for the big grid batteries is even more complex, and there's a lot of bespoke NISO and Elexon services that have been created for those, and they tend to be quite shallow markets that change very quickly, and people sort of jump on a bandwagon and then it all sort of moves forwards. I think at the low voltage, at these kinds of community scale, the arbitrage is fundamentally based on volatility in the grid, and as long as we continue to add more solar and wind generation to the grid, that volatility is only going to get more significant. So I think the tension here, as people have rightly said about, what about vehicle to grid and these areas? I think the tension here comes from, as you add more batteries, we also need to add more renewable generation. And there's still a long way to go to get to a renewable dominated grid that we would all like to get to. So I think the government itself projects a need for 5 times as much battery storage on our grid compared to what is out there today. So there is plenty of market potential for this. And irrespective of what happens with gas prices and things, as we try and move away from fossil fuels and actually have a resilient and sovereign energy generation, batteries have to be a big part of that.
Brilliant, thank you. There's some questions on returns on investment, and one relevant one from Noel about considerations made for the embodied carbon within and the ethical sourcing of batteries. How quickly is that paid back? Is the 20 tons of CO2 saved per annum or over the lifetime of the battery? I think that was in the presentation. And are there other materials or types of batteries that perhaps cost more that are worth investing in and last longer?
So on the kind of environmental impact of batteries, obviously there is quite a big impact from making a battery. So it's got to be working hard. To install it and then not use it is a negative thing to do environmentally. So when you plug it in, please do make it work as hard as possible, I think. Lithium batteries are what everyone's using because it's what everyone's using, and the manufacturing and the supply chains are so well developed. Sodium batteries are available. They're a bit more expensive. Other options are a bit more niche. They might work in certain situations, but really to get over the commercial success story that is lithium battery manufacturing is going to take quite a special case, I think.
Just to add, the 20 tons of, estimate is per year, so there is a lot more benefit across a 15-year lifetime, which is a typical expected lifetime for one of these battery systems. And on the embodied carbon front, I think, as Zach said, if you're using the asset appropriately and putting it to use, the payback period in terms of carbon is in the order of a couple of years. So it is a decent payback period on carbon, but yes, as with a lot of sort of renewable technologies, there is a carbon payback period that we should be mindful of. And so that is an important question to ask. So, yeah, thank you. And in terms of ethical sourcing, linking that together, I think it is a challenge in the sense that the prices have dropped because of Chinese manufacturing and the scale that they have built. In terms of the ethical impact of that, I guess that is a decision that people need to account for and to consider in their own decisions of batteries. I think there are companies who are doing second use batteries, recycling EV batteries, and I very much applaud that. There are complications when you're doing this, and it does make the job harder. But they do represent a different way to get hold of that battery. It's just whether you can get enough secondhand EV batteries that are still functionally usable to have the sort of grid level impact that we want to try and influence. So yeah, lots of good questions in there.
The cost on secondhand batteries often isn't as good as you'd expect as well. The actual battery cells are a very rapidly diminishing cost of the project. So the enclosures, the wiring, the electricians, the concrete slabs underneath, because these are quite heavy units, those prices are staying the same while batteries are plummeting. So getting secondhand batteries from 10 years ago isn't the benefit that you might think it is at first glance.
And there is a chemistry nuance to that as well, which without spending too much time on that, there are different lithium chemistries. I think someone in the chat very rightly pointed out lithium iron phosphate as the predominant chemistry for static storage like this. And actually, most EVs don't use lithium iron phosphate. They use what's called a manganese cobalt, a different chemistry. That chemistry does not last as long, typically 1,000 cycles for that, whereas the iron phosphate chemistry is 10,000 cycles. So it's not even close. It's an order of magnitude difference. And so if you think about a car, a car that uses 300,000 miles has only put 1,000 cycles in its battery if it has a 300-mile range, whereas a static battery that's doing 10,000 cycles is stressing it a lot harder. And so that links to the vehicle to grid question as well, where vehicle to grid sounds great, but actually if your vehicle is not a lithium iron phosphate battery, you probably shouldn't be using it for vehicle to grid because you're actually damaging the battery very, very quickly on that vehicle compared to if it was a iron phosphate battery. So there are technical nuances. Again, we'd be very happy to dive into that more detail with people if anyone's interested.
Thank you. That's a brilliant offer. Coming back to the financial model around risks, I'm going to get this wrong. Hai Chao Wang asks, what's the typical battery failure rate over its lifetime? What annual inspection or maintenance costs should we allow for? And what's the estimated decommissioning and disposal cost at the end of battery life? And battery warranty is usually limited time or energy throughput. What would you consider to be the expected average discharge cycles per day when modeling the system? This is all grist to people who are going to go away and model away to decide whether to do or not to do.
Yeah. Very, very, very good questions there. So failure rates, I think I'm going to struggle to answer that one. I think the technology, especially at the kind of cabinet scale, is new enough that I don't think there is a sort of widely established industry number for that. Zach, I don't know if you have anything to contribute on that. So, but I think it's a good question. I would say if you look at the international markets, these technologies have been rolled out in China probably a few years ahead of places like here. There aren't stories of sort of dramatic failure rates, but at the same time, even there, it's probably 4 or 5 years old is the sort of typical system age. Annual inspection maintenance costs. Yeah. So in our modeling, we factor in sort of an annual maintenance visit and a servicing visit into all of that. The costs are not insignificant, depends on how you're doing it. But then if it's just a person to come around and clean out a few things and check things, it's in the order of hundreds of pounds, not sort of much more than that. And then, yeah, decommissioning, disposal, warranties and all this stuff. So decommissioning, disposal cost, it depends a bit on recycling market. I think there was another question somewhere about sort of second life and future of battery recycling. There are a number of companies growing around recycling of materials. I think it's called black mass, which is the kind of ground up lithium battery sort of powder that they can then sell back to manufacturers. So I think I don't think there should be a disposal cost. I think there should be enough of recycling market, certainly in 10, 15 years time, for the at least to be cost neutral, if not even paying for the value of the materials that an end of life battery has. And then yeah, the battery warranty, another good question. So we're typically modeling between 1 to 1.5 cycles a day. It depends on the manufacturer. They'll typically list a total number of cycles as their sort of warranty target. So you just have to look at the numbers on that carefully and work out how much the battery asset in the short term and maybe get more return from it, but accept a slightly lower project lifetime or vice versa. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask one off the wall question. Are we thinking about non-battery electricity storage, air, gas, whatever else, kinetic?
It's always interesting when you see them, but on costs, I haven't seen them really compete with lithium batteries, unfortunately. It would be very exciting to have compressed air storage or something like that. But that's probably beyond community energy scale at the moment.
I am familiar with a number of businesses doing sort of kinetic storage. There's one that I've sort of spoken to the leadership team of, and it's a different application. I think the energy density of lithium batteries is hard to beat for a lot of these technologies. I think where it gets interesting is some of the new flow batteries that are coming through. People, if you want to look it up, something called vanadium flow and other sort of flow chemistries, where it's a flow cell where you're essentially your capacity is limited by the size of your tank of your reagents, and you're sort of flowing reagents across a sort of battery cell. And there's a number of companies that are working in this area. They're all very early stage. So from a kind of useful scale and accessibility point of view, these are technologies to keep an eye on and to see how they evolve. But if we want to do batteries in the next probably 2 or 3 years, I think the only viable option is the kind of sodium ion or lithium ion chemistries that are commercialized.
Brilliant. And on that really blue sky note, I think we're going to wrap up, because I've got a couple of things I would like to say, and I would like to launch our poll. Please, will you click the link that should be in the, the poll is up. And when you've done that, the screen will clear and you can fill in our feedback survey, which we need for funding and to get feedback for the ELN. We will share all the relevant information, the slides, the links, Richard's document and the recording of the event. If you found it useful, please do tell other people to go and look at it. The questions that we didn't manage to ask will be added to the list for the frequently asked questions document that will be coming up, will come out of the working group, I'm sure. I don't know whether I thanked everybody on the panel, but that was just amazing input. Thank you so much. The wisdom in the room is palpable and will only get more as you all join them. Before we finish, I want again to encourage you to carry your enkindled enthusiasm for community batteries over into responding to the government's call for evidence on community batteries. The link to the CEE response, draft response, will be posted in the chat, and it's also accessible via our current consultations page and our new batteries page. And the links are almost easy to remember. The CE response is color coded to help you know which questions to answer. So those of you who aren't yet doing batteries or don't have a big task, there are 35 questions. You do not, even if you are an expert at delivering batteries, have to answer them all. You answer what you can or inspired to or can be bothered with. Anything is better than nothing. So it's green for something that almost anyone can answer, amber, orange for answer if you have or are planning batteries, and red questions are answer if you actually have a community battery. And again, if you have a battery, it's really important that you respond. Green questions are mostly about definition and categorization of community batteries, and Yang has made a useful response to question 2. Basically, we say that any battery that is owned by a bona fide community energy organisation that is delivering benefits to the community is a community battery, even if it's doing most of its work facing the energy system. The energy system also needs our help to transition, and it's better if that's happening bottom up and from a delivering benefit to the grassroots than co-opted by the big companies. To maximise the uptake of community batteries, which obviously is a government aim, and the delivery of community benefit from our systems and the batteries, we may also have to be being hard-headed about maximising revenues from delivering system services and not just focusing on bill savings to people. Can we go on to the next slide, please? This is a table that is in the beginning of the government consultation document, and it shows that they have a fairly narrow pale blue focus on what can be a community battery. We know of some very innovative and imaginative community-owned home battery systems at scale. Now, they may be difficult to run, but they may equally be very successful, and they shouldn't be excluded from the definition and from the government's support for the sector. There are other green questions about the impact of batteries on the energy system, which I'm sure you'll have lots to say about, suitability for particular types of buildings or tenure, regulatory requirements, and examples you're aware of from elsewhere. And so all the nerds among you can go diving down your rabbit holes and come up with brilliant stuff that Australia and elsewhere are doing, where they really have scaled community batteries. And crucially, what should the government do to support community batteries? Many of the orange and red questions are asking for details of batteries you have or are planning, including the business model. And obviously, there's a lot to come out in the wash, but please, any wisdom and numbers you have, do share. They also ask about public attitudes, regulation, barriers to installing. There are several questions on that. Guidance that would be useful, bill savings, which is obviously a big motivation of why they think community batteries are important, and safety. And a key question is, why did you or will you choose to install a community battery? I hope that will now be easier to answer. Please go away and dream batteries and join our working group to keep abreast of developments. And at a few seconds to 3 o'clock, I'd like to thank again our amazing panel who came in under time, delivering a very complex but clear presentation. And to you all for attending, and may you carry away this inspiration and infect others so that batteries can the sector can really grab its share of taking batteries local and community. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.